everyone. Thanks for joining us for Weather Extra. I'm meteorologist Jillian Johnson. As you can see behind me, we finally saw some rain last week, but we all know that it has been a very long summer with the excessive heat and lack of rain. So seeing that rain fall from the sky was a welcome sight. Although we saw rain, the past 3 months were filled with numerous records. We get Weather Extra kicked off by bringing in meteorologist Sean Bellafury, who has a look back at one of the hottest summers on record for Central Texas.
Now that we have kind of flipped the script and turned the corner away from summer, it's a good time to look back at the summer that was. And some of these numbers that I was going through, just honestly very, very eye-opening. Not only just how hot the summer was, but how hot it was deep into the year. On the 8th of September, 108-degree high temperature. That was one of only 5 days ever in history to see a September temperature of 108 or higher. And that would be record-breaking temperatures in all but 4 days in the month of July. That's how extreme the heat was. Summer 23 was the third hottest summer on record. Last year was the second hottest, so back-to-back years. This summer was also the second driest on record, and we also had the most number of 100-degree days in back-to-back years. Last year and this year, 133 of them. We also have some more numbers that, I mean, I can't just fit it on the screen. Second most 105-degree days plus in a year at 26. Third most triple-digit days in a calendar year at 65. And we also, of course, had the longest stretch of rain-free conditions ever, not even just in summer alone, at 56 days consecutively. We were dealing with the heat, but look at the heat across the country. This shows the percentile above or below where this summer, this August more specifically, ranks. And all the spots that you see, those red dots, are warmer than average conditions, and where you see the brightest colors, that is the record warmest on record. The only spots that were cooler than average were down into the Arctic Circle. I will go ahead and say I do believe that this year was one of the worst summers we have ever seen, and when you combine 2022 and 2023 and look back at 2021, the numbers are pretty staggering. I kind of cherry picked some of this data, taking the most extreme numbers, comparing 2011 and the year before, above or after, to 2022 and 2023. 2022 and 2023 worse in every regard, including rainfall, number of highs of 105 or above, number of triple-digit days. The only spot where we weren't bested were lows of 80 degrees or above. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafury, KWTX News 10.
Thanks, Sean. Now, it was sure nice to actually finally see some rain for once, but we still have a long way to go before we can get out of the drought. Here's a look at the latest drought monitor that came out on Thursday. As you can see, majority of our area is under the worst level of drought there is. Exceptional, that dark red shade. Some of our eastern areas are doing a little bit better, but still in bad shape under severe or extreme drought. While we did see some much needed beneficial rain, we won't see any improvements until hopefully next week's drought update. But again, we have a very long way to go before we are out of the drought. Although a few burn bans have been lifted across Central Texas, majority of our area is still under a burn ban. So continue to be cautious while spending time outdoors. Now turning to the biggest weather story across the globe, thousands of people are dead in Libya after a massive storm hit coastal communities in the North African nation. A government minister says the death toll has now topped more than 5,000. In one hard-hit city, it's feared 1 out of every 20 residents were killed. Now there are also fears of waterborne diseases spreading across the country due to damage in sanitation and hygiene infrastructure. CBS's Ian Lee reports.
The devastation in eastern Libya is counted one body at a time. This one, a child. Rescuers find them among the wreckage and debris of what's left of these communities after Storm Daniel swept across the Mediterranean and into the country. With morgues overwhelmed, residents are placed on the streets they once called home. This hospital director says those not identified are photographed, numbered, and buried. Many end up in mass graves. Torrential rains flooded cities. Staff evacuated patients at this hospital as waters rose. Mustafa Salam lost 30 relatives who were asleep when 2 dams burst just above the city of Derna. Satellite photos showed the area before and the catastrophic aftermath. Libyan officials say thousands are dead and thousands more are still missing. Chaos in the war-torn country complicates getting aid in as rival factions compete for power. President Biden is pledging support for the Libyan people, who are already no strangers to suffering. Ian Lee, CBS News, London.
NASA is teaming up with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to measure pollution. Earlier this year, NASA launched a satellite to measure air quality over North America, and now it's conducting a separate mission to see the effects of pollution on the ground. Ashley Nanfria has details.
It may be an unusual sight as a large plane soars only 1,000 feet overhead. But inside, researchers are on an important mission as they tackle air pollution.
We can understand the science behind air quality much better than before.
The project is called Aroma, and it studies how air quality has changed over the years at a higher detail.
There's a lot of new sources that we haven't seen in the past.
From the East Coast to the West, NOAA and NASA are focusing on cities with the highest air pollution, and the Central Valley made it to their 2023 list.
It's dominated by agricultural emissions, by oil and gas. There's a lot of transportation. There's also transport into the valley. So there's a lot of things that are happening in this area that are somewhat unusual. And it's also a valley, so it keeps the pollution in.
Researchers flew overhead last week in NASA's DC-8 aircraft, equipped with 30 different instruments to study air quality and chemistry.
In the Central Valley specifically, we're looking at compounds like ammonia, like methane. Those are often from agricultural.
Collecting up-to-date data on which pollutants are causing the most impact.
Volatile chemical products are a large source of pollutants into the atmosphere. So that's day-to-day products that we all use. So those are personal care products, cleaning products, prints, inks, paints on the wall.
What's collected now will help researchers improve the future of air quality and how it's forecasted.
To improve the science that's needed for future modeling, for future understanding of what regulations actually make sense.
And NASA released the first data maps from its pollution monitoring instrument called TEMPO last month. Now, it creates visual representations of pollution and air quality over North America. TEMPO was launched in April from a SpaceX rocket. It makes hourly daytime scans from 22,000 miles above the equator. NASA says it will improve studies of pollution from sources including rush hour traffic, smoke and ash from forest fires and volcanoes, and the effects of fertilizer application on farmland. According to NASA, it's the first space-based instrument that continuously measures air quality above North America with the resolution of a few square miles. All right, well, still to come on Weather Extra, we head to outer space to cover the latest news. We'll have much more coming up on the other side of this break. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Now on to some exciting space news. NASA says its James Webb Space Telescope has observed a planet outside our solar system that could support life. Scientists say the data hints the exoplanet K2-18 could have a liquid ocean surface. They say carbon-bearing molecules have been discovered in the atmosphere of the habitable zone exoplanet K2-18b by an international team of astronomers. This discovery provides a fascinating glimpse into a planet unlike anything in our solar system and raises interesting prospects about potentially habitable worlds elsewhere in the universe. And this is also pretty fascinating. NASA released a new image of a newborn star captured on the Webb telescope. In a tweet, NASA wrote, "What might a baby picture of our sun look like? Seen in this Webb image is a newborn star with supersonic jets of gas spewing from its poles. It's only a few tens of thousands of years old here, but when it grows up, it'll be much like our sun." And then take a look at the first images from the Euclid Space Telescope, taken from about 1 million miles above Earth. These are preliminary test shots showing a few galaxies, but scientists at the European Space Agency have big plans for the spacecraft. They hope to create the largest ever 3D map of the sky, revealing more about the unknown parts of the universe. The project manager says the initial images suggest that the telescope could exceed expectations. And NASA says Frank Rubio now holds the record for the longest consecutive time in space for a U.S. astronaut. Sunday afternoon marked 361 days off planet for him. That surpasses the time astronaut Mark Windhey spent there. Rubio is due to return to Earth on September 27th with at least 371 days in Earth's orbit. That number, however, will keep him shy of the world record for time in orbit. That mark belongs to Russian astronaut Valery Polyakov, who logged 437 continuous days in the 90s. Rubio went to the space station thinking he'd only be there for 6 months, but the spacecraft that brought him there actually sprang a leak, which then deemed him unsafe to return home. Well, all right, it's been a year since we launched our YouTube channel, Degrees of Science. And coming up after the break, we'll take a look back at some of the very interesting interviews we have done over the last year. Stick with us.
This week, we're celebrating 1 year of Degrees of Science, our special project where we sit down and talk one-on-one with experts in the field of science, STEM, and weather to learn about their career and what's going on in their field of expertise. And we started off our project, the very first interview, with a meteorologist that worked with National Geographic and Disney Plus on the series America the Beautiful.
We did get to see thunderstorms that created tornadoes.
Yes, yeah. That was, at the end of the day, that was one of the main goals of our deployments out to get these storms, because they had this shot list that they wanted basically from us to be able to work it into the various stories that they wanted to tell as they were producing the series for Nat Geo. So it wasn't all about tornadoes. You know, they wanted just a lot of interesting shots with storms developing, different reveals of storms, things to help them really show the majesty, if you will, the magnitude, the scale of these storms. But you could tell from the feedback, and again from the shot list, tornadoes were kind of the final nugget that they really wanted from us. They wanted specific reveals, you know, shots where maybe we're flying low to the ground, the camera's looking down, and then you're looking at the prairie, and then you tilt up and you see the tornado, this big reveal to sort of show the menace that it is.
That first time when you were on Space Shuttle Columbia, y'all would launch up. What was that feeling like the first time that you didn't have gravity? Just that being at space, what was that feeling like?
Well, first of all, you get into this situation of hypergravity, meaning when the main engine's light, you get catapulted into the air. And what that does is push you back in your seat to 3 to 3.5 times your weight. So you feel really heavy and can't barely move. And it's extremely noisy as you're going off into space. But as soon as we get to around 200 nautical miles above the Earth and the engine's cut off, you go from all this noise and chaos to just smooth as glass. And then you begin to see things kind of rise up before you. And that's your checklist or your gloves that you're taking off or your helmet that you're taking off. And you know that I am in space.
How is it that prints that were from dinosaurs 100 million years ago, how is it that we can still see those in the riverbed there?
That's a fantastic question, and it's something that takes a little bit of imagination. You know, we think of the dinosaurs walking through the Biloxi River as it looks today, and that's not what happened. Things were very, very different back then. The river didn't exist for millions and millions of years after this time period. So at that time, the dinosaurs were walking along a seashore, kind of an intertidal zone that had very thick, sticky mud. And so the tracks that they left behind were very well preserved. They had a lot of detail. And then within a few, maybe hours, even up to a few days before those tracks had a chance to dry out and crumble away, the tide came in and laid layers of sediment over the top of those tracks, and that's what preserved them. And now the river, all these millions of years later, is exposing those tracks. It washes away those layers of sediment that were laid down, and that's what allows those tracks to still be seen today.
What is the turbulence and just the flight through a hurricane? What does that feel like while you're up there working?
It can be pretty smooth sometimes, believe it or not, especially some of the more developed hurricanes where they're just kind of stabilized. And then you get missions like we experienced last week with Ian, right as it was making landfall, continued intensification, rapid intensification. And so you get those pockets of turbulence. It's a lot, you know, kind of like a roller coaster flying through a car wash at the same time, where you're just inundated with precipitation, and then you get pockets of turbulence where it's a kind of a series of updrafts and downdrafts where you can, lose or gain several hundred feet, 1,000 feet in altitude going through an eye wall instantaneously almost.
All right, so you made that sound a lot calmer than it is. What does a 1,000-foot drop instantaneously feel like in turbulence when you're in a plane?
Yeah, it's hard to describe with words. You really have to experience it. But again, it's kind of like a series of updrafts and downdrafts. So the plane will just kind of be flying along, and then you hit, kind of a zero G, where basically you're just flying straight up, and then you can slam back down again and back up and back down until you get through the worst of it. And so if you can imagine what that feels like, any roller coaster that you've been on where you've kind of experienced some of that pit of your stomach feeling, that times about 10.
This week marks 1 year of Degrees of Science. I wanted to show you a few clips of some of our best interviews over the last year. What's the most interesting discovery that you've made in your planet hunting so far?
Sure. So we have a system called K2-138, and I'm very sorry, all exoplanets have terrible names, but it was a system that we found using Kepler data. The reason the system is fairly exciting is it's got 6 planets in it, and the inner 5 planets are all small planets very close to their star, and they orbit in resonance. So a resonance is when the periods of the planets, those years, how long it takes them to go around, are related to each other by very simple integer ratios, for instance, 2 to 1. So the inner one goes around twice and the next one goes around once. And so what we see is this like clockwork system of resonances of tiny planets all crammed in close together. And the only reason they can stay so close together is because then they're in these really stable resonances. And the reason I love it is because it plays music. So resonances are intervals in music. And so you can actually turn these resonances into a song. Oh. And so it's a citizen science planet system that plays music.
Oh, that's awesome. We also heard the music that NASA put out about the black hole. That hopefully the music from that system is cool. Not as creepy as the black hole music. So
no, the music from the K2-138 system is more like Twinkle Twinkle, more like a little melody. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what this book is all about?
It's one of those things where I wanted it to be something that, kids are reading and saying, wow, but it might be something that a parent would read and be like, wow, I didn't know that either. And this is kind of an aggregation of those wow weather moments. One of the things that I love talking about is the weight of clouds. A typical summertime cumulus cloud can weigh as much as 2 million pounds, which is a really big number. But there's no reference point to that. How much is 2 million pounds? What is 2 million pounds? We know it's a lot, but is there a way that you can explain that to a young child and a young learner in a way they'll get? Well, I researched how much an elephant weighs. An elephant weighs about 20,000 pounds. So doing some simple math, you could say that one puffy summertime cumulus cloud weighs as much as 100 elephants. And I think that's a visual that a 5 or a 6 or a 7-year-old child can relate to. And then you get into some pretty fun science. It's like, okay, well, clouds are floating, but elephants certainly don't float. So how could a cloud weigh as much as 100 elephants? So I think my book, Wow Weather, the original book, is kind of an aggregation of fun, exciting, and kind of wow weather moments.
There's certain experiments, the hands-on kind of stuff you show that really gets a big reaction from the kids?
During the physics show, when I have the presentation, I like to start with the big cloud, and that's always creates this, physics is the best. Liquid nitrogen, I use liquid nitrogen. It's a temperature that is 400 Fahrenheit colder than the temperature of your skin. So if you just pour liquid nitrogen, there will be a cloud, condensation, water vapor will be condensed because of low temperature liquid nitrogen. And then if you take a pot and you put boiling water, pour boiling water in this pot, and then you throw liquid nitrogen, huge difference in temperature, and then there is just, fountain of this steam coming out. It's a huge cloud, and children love it. And then what we try to do, if we don't have an enormous group, we allow them to walk in this cloud, and that's another great experiment. You're walking in the cloud.
something people have heard the term of, but they don't know a lot exactly what it is. What exactly is El Nino and La Nina?
Sure. Most people have heard of El Nino, maybe from Chris Farley's Saturday Night Live skit. It is not, in fact, a storm. It's a global weather pattern that is induced by changes in the temperature of the surface of the Pacific Ocean. So the central tropical Pacific Ocean gets a little warmer than normal, that's El Nino, a little cooler than normal, that's La Nina, and that has the power to change global weather patterns.
How cool of an event is this eclipse going to be for Central Texas next April?
It's going to be very, very cool, and it is one of the unique experiences that we have. I'm usually saying that watching a total solar eclipse is a visceral experience because you know it's coming, but when you get to see the diamond ring, it's fabulous. It's just a very, very unique experience. I wouldn't cross the street to watch a 50% or partial eclipse, but we should travel around the world to watch a total solar eclipse. It's a really unique experience, and it is beautiful.
Well, if you'd like to watch any of the Degrees of Science interviews from the past year or watch any episode of Weather Extra, you could just scan the QR code right here behind me. That'll take you directly to our YouTube page. Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. We'll see you again next weekend.